So I think what we're going to do is we're just going to get going this morning. This is the third of 3 panels that we decided to construct in response to the global response to Black Lives Matters, to think about the crisis in diversity really that we have in the geosciences. And obviously, as the representative of a learned body associated with the JOSOC, the Volcanic Magmatic Studies Group has a duty of care really to ensure that we're trying to do all we can to improve that. And we tried to take a kind of discussive approach with this by running 3 panels. And this is the third of those 3 panels. And what we're here to do today really is to have a good chat about what actions we think are important, to try and prioritize those. But very specifically, during the other 2 panels, one of the things that it was clear was that people really want to understand something more about what we do in the background in the Volcanic and Magmatic Studies Group to try and address this issue. But also particularly, we really wanted to hear from UK Research and Innovation, who obviously sponsor a lot of the research that we do, where we do it in many different countries around the world. So I'm really delighted that both Jo O'Leary, who's the head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion for the whole of UK Research and Innovation. So we're very privileged that she's given us the time to come and introduce some of these ideas today, is here. And then also, of course, we have our own estimable president of the Volcanic and Magmatic Studies Group, who does a lot of stuff in the background. And then I'm really pleased too that our outgoing officer for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, Sam Engwell, is going to join us for the last panel discussion, because she's been trying to enact a lot of things during her time on the VMSG committee. So we're really keen to hear from that. So I won't hang on for too much longer. What I'm going to do is pass over to Sally, who's going to start out by explaining some of the things that we've done at VMSG that will hopefully also give Jo a little bit of context as well for what we've been up to. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Jenny. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share some of the things that we've been doing at VMSG to address the inequalities that we know are present in our community. And this is a very difficult thing to monitor. So I've kind of looked around for sort of ways that we can actually sort of examine how we are progressing as an organization. And the kind of the framework, if you like, that I came up with that I think is most appropriate to what we're doing is this one that's published by the Science Council and the Royal Academy of Engineering. And what this shows is how organizations such as ourselves can monitor our progress. And so it starts off with sort of initiating actions, and then moving into a phase where we're developing these actions, and then how we engage with others and how these processes evolve as well. And so this is what I'm going to do in the next sort of 10 minutes or so, is to kind of take you through some of the examples of what we've been doing. And as Jenny said, a lot of this is behind the scenes. And that's why I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to present to you today, so that hopefully everybody is kind of on board with what we're doing and sort of familiar with the progress that we're making. So, oops. Oh dear, my screen has hung. Oh, sorry about that. So, so the initiation of the VMSG sort of pathway to addressing equality, diversity and inclusion really started in early 2019, when we worked alongside our umbrella organisations, which is the Geological Society of London and the Mineralogical Society, to put together a code of conduct for meetings and events. This is absolutely critical to ensuring that what we do in these activities is something that everybody feels comfortable in this environment. And then more recently, what we've done is we've undertaken a survey of our members. So what Janine and I realized back in 2019 was that actually we don't know who you are. We have no idea of the sort of the demographics, the gender, the country of origin, the status, academic, PhD students, ECRs, etc., of people that are engaging with the VMSG community and want to use this as an opportunity to share their science. And so this is what we did after our winter meeting in Plymouth in 2020, which actually seems quite a long time ago now. And this was really, really important, to getting together sort of hard data that we can use as a sort of a baseline to monitor our progress as well. And so these, I'm going to show you 4 slides, which all have this same sort of template. And this contains this initiation, which is deemed as level 1 by the Science Council, level 2, which is how we develop these activities, level 3 is how we engage with them, and level 4 is how these evolve. So, of course, for VMSG, something that's really important to what we do, how we present our science and how we network, is when we hold the meetings, workshops and events, so field trips, etc. And we started kind of looking at the diversity of our speakers back in 2019. And we've also started to kind of look at data as well to look more about the makeup of who's doing presentations, oral presentations or posters. And then we've been developing this. We've developed this ambition to look at the diversity of the speakers and who is in the audience as well. And then we've tried to engage with the local organising committees. And in 2020, what Janine, myself and Sammy did was to update the guidelines that we have for local organising committees. So this booklet is available on our website, but it's something that we make sure the local organising committees in the future will look over very carefully, because this makes sure that there are things such as venue accessibility to people with physical and maybe hidden disabilities, that we're sort of catering for as many needs of people as possible, and that these are inclusive events. And so probably where we've got to in this is to the evolving stage. We've got to level 4. And so what we don't have and what we need to work on now is having this clear, sustained cultural change, something that we can actually see, something that's visible as to how we represent the sort of the diverse membership of our community. Something else that's really important to VMSG is celebrating the contributions that members of our community make. And we're very fortunate that we're able to do this by a series of awards and prizes. And we can also help people attend meetings and go on field trips and do field work related to their research by having a series of bursaries as well. And what happened in 2019 and has really, I think, changed the way that we operate as a committee and the way that we can represent you, is that everybody on the committee has a dedicated role. And so Nick Gardner was appointed as our awards and bursary officer in 2019. And Nick is responsible for overseeing the whole process. And so what we want, or what we believe, is that this process is transparent, that we look carefully at the criteria and the processes that we have that are involved in ranking the sort of the applications that we have. And I think we're very much at the engaging stage now. We haven't really got into the so-called evolving stage, which is level 4. Something that we absolutely have to address is the effort that we make to generate nominations and submissions from underrepresented groups. And we need to have sort of qualitative and quantitative signs that this progress is evident. And we need to be able to demonstrate that we have this clear, sustained cultural change in how we're kind of doing this procedure. And I think this is something Mike will touch on a little bit later in his presentation. With respect to monitoring and measuring what we're doing concerning equality and diversity and inclusion, Sam Engwell took on the role of the EDI officer in 2019 and has been really a sort of a force behind driving the sort of the analysis that we're doing of the sort of the equality and diversity that we have in our community. And this culminated in a report that we published in 2020. And this contains qualitative and quantitative data. And so I think we've very much gone through the whole initiation and developing and sort of, we're kind of in this engaging stage now as well, because what we realized when we put together this report was that actually there were many questions that we didn't ask that we should have asked. So this is very much an ongoing process. And this report is published on archive. So, you know, this is freely available to people. And, you know, we welcome your feedback on this. What other things should we have considered that we didn't? We absolutely know that we didn't consider in enough detail people from marginalized groups. Much of the data is based on conferences that we held between 2015 and 2020, and conferences that didn't specifically collect data with this in mind. So there's definitely improvement that we can make there as well. And then finally, what are we doing with respect to how we communicate with you, how we outreach to the public, and how we engage with our audience as well? So we engage through our newsletter. We have public outreach lectures, which maybe people aren't familiar with. These were initiated at St Andrews after the winter meeting there in 2019. Steve Sparks and Rosalie Lopez gave public lectures to underrepresented groups in Dundee. These were really well received. We had excellent feedback from those. And likewise, Ian Stewart kindly gave a lecture in Plymouth to a similar audience as well. So we're definitely initiating and developing and engaging with this process. Jenny took on the role of outreach officer in, I think, about June in 2020. And, you know, these panel discussion meetings that we're having now are a big part of that. They're a big part in how we engage with you as our community and how we can push things forward. So we're definitely still in this whole sort of engaging and evolving process with respect to the progress that we're making here. So what is the future for VMSG? How do we move forward with all of this? How do we kind of capitalize on these discussion meetings and the things that we're doing behind the scenes? Well, the first thing to recognize is that for sure we should and we absolutely can do more to address the inequalities that we have in our community. So this is the diagram that I showed on my first slide. This is the one that was put together by the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Science Council back in, I think, 2017 now. And when I was thinking about my presentation the other day, I was kind of looking at this carefully, thinking, I wonder where this all stems from. How did they kind of come up with this design? And then I thought, wow, this is really closely linked to what we do all the time. What is essentially, you know, our day-to-day activities. We're focused with this whole kind of initiation and developing and engaging with what happens in these systems beneath volcanoes. And actually, where are we now? I think we're at a stage where we're crystallizing these ideas and we're trying to recharge the VMSG community with these efforts to do more. And absolutely what we need to do is we need to evolve before we can have these sort of dramatic effects. And so we're absolutely committed to working together with other organizations. And something that we've done very recently is to work alongside other special interest groups that are part of the Mineralogical Society, and some of them are part of the Geological Society as well, and work together to see how we can expand on some of the things that have emerged from these discussion sessions. So I thought this image that I took whilst I was doing fieldwork in Galapagos, sampling on some of the volcanoes there, was really kind of sums it all up, that we absolutely can't operate alone in this. And what we require is the input of you, people in the VMSG community, to come out and support us in these efforts. So I've mentioned some of the people on the VMSG committee that have been sort of behind these efforts, but actually everybody on the committee is totally committed to working on this. So people like Mike have been involved in social media and sort of helping with these events. And everybody is really a big part of this that's on the committee. So I'd like to end my presentation there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sally. That's fantastic. I'm going to do a little clappy hand in a minute, but I'd like to quickly hand over to Jo, who's going to tell us a little bit about some of the things we've been really interested in, which is plans.
So thank you very much for the invitation to come and talk to you today. Jenny, you gave me a very big introduction. So I'm the head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion for UKRI, and my responsibility is for our work as a funder and an investor in research and innovation. I work really closely with the head of EDI for employees, and also really closely with policy leads within each of the constituent parts of UKRI working on equality, diversity and inclusion, and also with our comms team in particular and our data and analysis team. So there's a big network of people contributing to this work. So within UK Research and Innovation, our vision is to create a system where everyone is treated with dignity and respect and has the opportunity to flourish and succeed. So that's our large overarching ambition. And I'm going to talk you through some of the work that has happened prior to me taking on this role in August, and some of the work that we have done more recently and our future plans as well. So lots of the work that has happened to date has been about building the foundations for this sustained and transformational change. So UKRI was formed back in April 2018, and one of the first actions was to appoint an executive champion for equality, diversity and inclusion, recognising the importance of senior leadership and commitment. We also appointed at that time an external advisory group, and this group comprises people from across the world with different backgrounds and experiences in EDI, and their role is to guide us and to challenge us on the work that we are doing. In 2019, a lot of work was done to make sure that the governance structures were put in place for EDI within the organisation. And that's really important as we think about how we embed the work across all of the different aspects of our work. We also undertook some evidence reviews, and there were 2 evidence reviews on equality, diversity and inclusion, one on domestic funding and one on international funding, and also a review on bullying and harassment, which also falls under my portfolio. And these evidence reviews have really helped us shape the programme by understanding what works, what doesn't work, and where the gaps are in our knowledge at the moment. We've also contributed to an inquiry by the Science and Technologies Committee, and I'll come back to that in a moment, and published a statement on bullying and harassment policies. In 2020, I think it's fair to say we didn't expect our work to turn out quite as it has done, and I'm sure that's true for many, many people. Throughout the year, we've continued to work collaboratively across government, so with BEIS, our parent government department, with other government departments, with other funders, with national academies, and with our stakeholders as well. One of the big actions for this year has been working on the impacts of COVID-19 on our communities and really understanding the impact on our different communities and contributing to the Women and Equalities Commission inquiry on the unequal and disproportionate impacts of COVID-19. And this has really shaped some of our work, and we are working on a revision of our EDI strategy at the moment, really thinking about how we will build out from COVID-19 and how we can undertake work to address these unequal impacts. We've made some policy changes in the last year, particularly addressed at extending grant funding and also providing PhD extensions due to the impacts of COVID. This has taken a lot of effort during the year, and we're kind of continuing to monitor these impacts now. In July, we published our harmonised diversity data for applications and awards. So this is data across the whole of UKRI. And this was a really major undertaking to bring that full data set together for all 7 of the research councils. We've also convened a forum on bullying and harassment, and this is a cross-funder and regulators forum. And this has had its first formal meeting in November, but had some preliminary meetings ahead of that. And our objective here is to really work across the research and innovation sector to understand what we can do to prevent bullying and harassment, with UKRI's approach really around prevention and leadership and understanding the stresses and triggers for bullying and harassment, and working to create an environment and research culture where those triggers and stresses are reduced. And also in the summer, Ottiline Liza joined us as Chief Executive. And if you've had the opportunity to hear Ottiline speak or to read any of her work, you'll know that she's very committed to diversity and inclusion and pushing forward with this agenda. So as I said, we are now working on revising our EDI strategy, thinking about the impacts of COVID-19 in particular, but also thinking about other events that have happened this year, including the publication of the government's roadmap for research and development. We are working hard to think about how we start changing conversations about EDI and address issues in different ways to create this sustainable change. And we're really challenging ourselves as a funder and also as part of the research and innovation system to work differently and to eradicate the structural and systemic inequalities. So this slide gives you an overview of our programme work. I think there's a little bit of a delay. Hopefully it will pop up in a second for you. Yep. So we're taking a whole systems approach to equality, diversity and inclusion. We know that there are no silver bullets, and we expect that there will be a number of different types of interventions that we have to make. So our big challenge areas are addressing inequality and underrepresentation in our portfolio, working to address unclear and persistent gaps in our data, and also working to build trust within the system and UKRI's processes. And we're doing this in a number of different ways, by piloting activities, by enhancing our data collection and analysis, and undertaking a programme of engagement activities. And all of this is underpinned by evidence and data and insight that we collect from across the organisation and from working with our stakeholders. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of some of the work that's happening at the moment to address underrepresentation and increase participation. So we know that the system needs fixing. It's not individuals that need fixing. We need to create a system that's open and inclusive for everyone to participate in and to flourish in. So part of our work is the review of our expert review and assessment practices. So how do we undertake our decision-making processes? Are there biases in there? What can we do to increase participation? One of the things that we are introducing is a narrative CV, which gives people an opportunity to describe their contributions in different ways and doesn't rely on the kind of linear expectations about a linear career path into academia. And we've also been doing work to promote the use of positive action. So for example, we've written to all of our training grant holders to remind them that they can use positive action where they see they have evidence of underrepresentation in recruitment of students to those programs, for example. And we'll be undertaking more work on positive action in the coming year. We have funding competitions to increase diversity and representation. So we have a competition at the moment led by Research England and the Office for Students to increase access and participation for Black, Asian and ethnic minority students into postgraduate training. We have competitions where we want to celebrate and increase diversity. So there's a competition at the moment led by the Arts and Humanities Research Council working with the BBC to increase awareness of Black composers. And we also run activities to support culture change. So EPSLC has committed some of its fellowship funding towards supporting leadership in EDI. Using our data and sharing our data is really important. So we, as I said, we publish our application and award data, and we do this in a very open way so that users can interrogate the data themselves and provide us with their comments and use the data to ask questions of us. So it's important, again, in building trust and transparency in what we do. We work across the research councils and Innovate UK and Research England to understand specific areas of interest where we might need to make interventions. And we also publish our HR data, so gender pay gap report, equal pay reports, etc. A big area for us in the coming year will be how we undertake our engagement and using collective deliberation to really bring our communities closer into our policy making and decision making. So we want to undertake a programme of work to engage and listen in different ways, being open to different ways of working with our communities, identifying people who perhaps previously haven't been able to access some of the more formal structures that we have in the organisation, and so really increasing participation. Specifically, we'll be developing some work on race equality summits, where we really want to work with our communities to not just understand barriers, but to understand what actions we can take. And we meet with the sector in different ways. We meet with individuals, we meet with established groups, we meet with grassroots organisations. And it's really important that we have this engagement and open dialogue with the sector. And then taking the next steps, so we will be publishing our EDI strategy. We're continuing to work with the sector. So this week we have published some diversity data, disaggregated data for Black, Asian and ethnic minority researchers. And one of the areas that we noted within that data set is that we can't solve this problem alone. So we know there's underrepresentation within the higher education sector. And so we've reached out to the sector to say, we want to work with you to understand the issues across the whole of the sector. We take responsibility for our part, but we need to work together. And we'll be continuing to work with our communities in the deliberative ways that I just mentioned. And then also we'll continue to work across government. So we are, for example, submitting evidence to all party parliamentary group inquiries. And Ottiline had recently attended the Science and Technologies Committee to speak about diversity and inclusion. So this is another part of our role of kind of working with government to create this system for research and innovation in the UK that's fair and open. I've touched quickly on bullying and harassment, but really our focus is on incentivising prevention strategies. And we're working as part of the forum that UKRI has convened with other funders and regulators to do some work on improving data collection and transparency, think about how we communicate and engage with our communities, and working across UKRI. So for example, we've recently worked with our Future Leaders Fellows who have prepared a video talking about how they take action to prevent bullying and harassment and provide that leadership within the research and innovation community. And that's a whistle-stop tour of everything that we're doing, and I look forward to joining the panel discussion.
thank you very much, Joe. That's been really helpful. And thank you very much, Sally, for those for that presentation as well. We're just going to spend a few minutes maybe providing some questions to both Sally and Joe before we go on to the survey. Some of the questions that you've been asking in the question Mentimeter. One of the top questions we had was about panelist training, and we were kind of wondering what it was. Is it harmonised cross councils, and how is it enacted? I guess Joe, could you talk to that a bit?
So, oh, sorry. Training for peer review panelists.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So it's, can I say hand on heart it's harmonised? Probably not, but I would say there's a lot of sharing of good practice across the councils and working together. I can talk about work that BBSLC did in particular, because I previously worked for BBSLC heading up their funding operations. So in terms of training for panel members, we would run inductions for our panel members before they attended a peer review meeting, and we would run a simulated peer review meeting. So we would provide guidance on the assessment criteria and our expectations of them as panel members, and then we would take a series of applications that we had permission to use. They were all redacted so that they remained anonymous. And then we would invite a chair of one of our peer review panels to come along and chair a meeting and actually run through in real time what a panel meeting would be like. And coupled with that, we did a lot of work about evidence-based decision making. So working with the criteria that we had set, and really thinking about factors that can introduce bias into your decision making. So that was a kind of BBSLC approach that's been shared with other councils across UKRI, and I think it's helped to inform our thinking about how we undertake panel member training. I think for us in BBSLC, running these simulated meetings was a really important way of making sure that when panel members arrived at a panel meeting for the first time, they felt like they were joining the panel on equal terms. So they weren't identifiable as someone new, they knew what was expected of them, and they felt supported in doing that and ready to make that decision-making process.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Actually kind of related to one of those things about unconscious bias, there was a question about civil service removal of unconscious bias training that will influence training impact to UKRI.
So we are just working through what that means for UKRI at the moment. I think unconscious bias training is a really interesting thing because it has been seen as a bit of a one-stop shop for training in diversity. We're building up our diversity training portfolio at the moment. And I think we are working with the information from the Behavioural Insights team to really understand what interventions we can make and what training and support that we will give. I think the challenge has been that unconscious bias training has often been mandatory, but we haven't seen any changes really resulting from that mandatory training. So it's timely to have that review.
Yeah, that's really interesting. This is one of the things that might come up a bit later after the survey, but something that came in from the panels, it was about ring fencing underrepresented representative groups, different ethnic minorities. So there's a question whether legal challenges regarding ring fencing, that's something that the UKRI has started thinking about.
Yeah, so we have started some work on positive action. We're working very closely with the UKRI legal team on what that might look like. So positive action is permissible if you can provide the evidence that it is that there's a need and you work through all those legal requirements. And I think it's an area where we know we need to do more work to understand what those interventions can mean. I think there are other ways of undertaking positive action, not just through funding. So we have done in recruitment for our senior boards and panels, there has been a real effort made to increase diversity and representation in those by reaching out into different communities, for example. And then there are other things that you can do, like, for example, mentoring to widen the participation and bring people through into the system that perhaps wouldn't have reached out to in other ways. But yes, watch this space. More will be coming on positive action.
Okay, that sounds great. So I think we're going to move on talk about the survey now, but there'll be a chance to kind of ask further questions at the end. So the next part of the talk really is talking about the survey, and I guess because of everything that's happened so much in 2020, for a lot of people this has given us a chance to kind of step back and reevaluate things. It's also shone a light on inequality in our society, in our organizations and our workplaces. And we've learned just this week actually from the EDI Geoscience Conference that in a survey of over 700 people, 86% of those had witnessed prejudice, discrimination, bias, or exclusion. So I think we can agree that with the Black Lives Matter movement, we've all learned a lot about these issues, and we've had to learn about our own privileges, unconscious biases, systemic and structural issues of racism, sexism, class, and so on. And we've had the opportunity to listen to more diverse voices and their lived experiences. We will continue to listen to those with empathy and to learn. But I think now is the time to start making tangible actions to try and tackle diversity issues for the future. And this is what this panel is all about. So the fact that we have so many of you in our small community be engaged in this throughout the whole process is overwhelming, and this has really provided the momentum for us to push forward with this and to make some changes. So you would have received the document that VMSG has put together. Maybe Jenny or someone can add that to the chat in case you haven't seen that. The document is a product of panels 1 and 2, where we've tried to distill the points that were made by the various panelists. We've also taken in your suggestions and questions that were made during the panel and following that in post surveys. And we've incorporated these ideas into the areas that VMSG operates within our community that Sally mentioned, which is giving out student bursaries for conferences and fieldwork, VMSG awards, our annual meeting, what we can do to kind of generally inform our community with our reach, and even lobby, act as navigate and lobby for actions to other organisations. So from panel 1, we heard that the VMSG should have a UK, but also an international focus because of the very nature of the research that we do. In our survey, one of the things that came out was that the biggest barrier to diversity was disproportionate rewards for egocentric approach to research, a lack of attention to other cultures, poor access to resources for overseas researchers such as instrumentation, and bias in recruitment. Panel 2 told us that mentoring was important, that the VMSG should not act in isolation, but work with learned societies, the special interest groups of the MinSoc and JOLSoc and so on, to try and tackle these inequalities with an intersectionality approach, so that it benefits multiple groups that may suffer discrimination or disadvantage. So we recognize that the VMSG community is small on the grand scale of things, but we believe that our influence to kind of influence the rest of geoscience or even science community should not be underestimated. And we've got Joe here, the head of Equality, Diversity, Inclusion of the UKRI here, which is evidence for that. Universities and organisations will be slow to change, we know this, but when they are in a position to do so, they'll be looking at smaller groups, perhaps like ourselves, and they'll be able to witness the changes that can be made when a community like ours comes together. So in a second, we're going to send you a survey, which we hope you can fill out individually, but we'll also place you into breakout rooms of, say, 7 or so, in case you want to discuss some of these issues or have any questions. And obviously, there's no obligation to kind of take part in these. You can just turn your video off and do that survey individually. There's about 5 or 6 pages of potential future actions you'll be asked to provide your view on, of their relative or their importance rather. And you can also ask questions along the way. or even use the question Mentimeter page that Jenny posted up as well, where you can upvote your question. Finally, we'll ask you what actions not covered in the survey or the document that we might prioritise in the future. And I think we've had one question to that already. Answers are fully anonymised, but we'll be sharing the broad results of these following the survey. So we'll give you about 25 to 20 minutes to do this, and then we'll come back to Sally, Sam, and Joe, where we'll talk about the results and the other actions that we can consider for the future.
Okay, so I have a wee favour to ask. So in the chat, just to make sure that you've got it before you go, I've put a link to the new Mentimeter survey. It's quite complicated and it will take a while. So the idea that we had is basically to put you into rooms where you can just sit with your camera off and your microphone off if you like, or you can have a bit of a chat about it where you don't understand what's going on. On every page, there's also the opportunity to ask questions or call me for everything if I've made the question incomprehensible. And also, as Mike said, we're really interested to hear what we're missing out. We've already had one suggestion that was made to the panel about an additional action that we could consider. So we're really keen to take something of a grassroots approach, obviously within the constraints that both UKRI and VMSG has with funding and time. Okay, so just make sure you've got that link, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to open all the rooms and send you to some random rooms where you have got some buddies sitting around. I think with the exception of Jane, who I'll have to assign a little bit later. Okay, so I'm going to open the rooms and then you're going to have 20-25 minutes. I'll give you a 2-minute warning when you're about to come back, and we'll take a look at our combined results because we get these immediately. Could I put the link in the chat again? Yes, of course, Jane. Here we go. There's the link. Okay, so that's the link. Grab the link, and I'm going to open the rooms now.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for filling out that survey. That's super helpful for what we do in the future. And we're just going to have a quick look at the results to see what the kind of general broad kind of thoughts that people had about these potential actions. Yeah. If you want to move on, that's it. Brilliant. So on the student bursaries, we asked about whether we should have collaboration plans for students applying for fieldwork, and also about kind of removing some of the funding barriers or some of the barriers or acknowledging some of those barriers that students have in those awards. And those were generally met with positive reactions. That's quite interesting. Sally or Sam, do you have any initial thoughts about that?
I think, you know, what came out of panel one was that we absolutely need to work with our community to make sure that there's recognition for overseas scientists that we collaborate with, especially with respect to fieldwork. And for me, that was a real big take-home message, that a lot of people are not aware of the responsibilities there. So, you know, this is something that we can definitely try and work on with our community. Changing the main criteria for student bursaries, this is something that we're looking at and something that we're considering right now.
Great, and I think that kind of follows on from what we were saying, I think, in one of the panels about opportunity being not necessarily equally distributed as talent is. Mm-hmm. So I think if we go to the next survey result. So this was less emphatic. This was about changing the VMSG awards. One of the things we were talking about, whether there was an emphasis on collaboration and inclusivity of overseas workers, and I guess this isn't always possible. And then also placing an emphasis on EDI kind of issues taken into the criteria that we judge awards by. So these were very positive. Any other thoughts, Sam or Sally?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the nature of our awards are very different. We kind of recognise senior members of our community. We recognise ECRs and also student excellence as well. And so, although, you know, we can try and emphasise things like commitment to EDI, there are, you know, this has to be taken in the context of that award as well. But for sure, it's things that, you know, we have to consider.
Yeah, and actually, just for kind of info, the latest postdoctoral keynote award, about 45% of that was weighted towards ways that they've contributed to the society or individuals or the community. So that's something that we are increasingly doing. Yeah, if we go to the next. So this is all about our annual meetings. So there was some very strong, kind of very valuable things that were voted very valuable. Stuff about targeting underserved minorities in our outreach event, which I think is really important, so we can engage with those people. Offering a mentoring system set up before the meeting for ECRs and other researchers, and then encouraging presentations in our meetings that talk about the ethics around our science. Less well or slightly less valuable, but still very valuable, was kind of this idea of pairing public engagement speakers, role models, with others, with other PhDs or ECRs, to kind of encourage best practice. Any thoughts on those?
Oh, just disappeared. The mentorship program, this is definitely something that we're considering, but actually this is more than the VMSG committee. This requires a community effort. And, you know, to my mind, this is where we are in this whole kind of engaging and evolving process, is that we need the whole community to be involved in this. This isn't something that a small committee can take on. But what we have to do is we have to reach out to other members of the community and get them involved. This is a community action.
Great. Okay, yeah. So some really strong things here as well about how the VMSG could act and use its influence and reach to kind of share kind of practical information. Some of that's regarding I guess what we talked about in panel 2 about being a good ally, sharing evidence for kind of systemic problems, using that annual meeting to kind of look at good practice as best we can. Something we've been looking at recently, and Sally might talk about this, is kind of coordinated collaborations network with other international partners. And then sharing some of those things on the website and newsletter about kind of the historical legacy, which is quite interesting as well. Maybe Sally, you'd like to talk about that collaboration network as well.
Yeah, I think something that's really exciting that's kind of taking place right now is that the VMSG community is bigger than what we have here in the UK, and that there are other societies from other parts of the world that are keen to establish links with us. And I think this is hugely exciting and something that could really take off. And it's definitely on the agenda for our next committee meeting, is to see how we can sort of have some sort of formal exchange plan in place. And this is really exciting.
Great, excellent. And if we go to the last kind of survey, which was all about lobbying and advocacy, and as you can see, it's all been voted kind of very valuable and something that that you as the community think we should change soon. Lobbying NERC and UKRI to create equitable learning and working environments. We talked about ring fencing funding for PhD students from developing nations. People think that's important too. Working with the JOLSOC and MINSOC to create kind of clear pathways in earth sciences. And we saw from panel 2, Shan De Silva's example of how that creates social mobility. We also talked about kind of decolonizing earth sciences. Perhaps that's something we should help to lobby. And very strongly, it was thought that we should encourage resource pooling to take geology to heart to reach communities. So actually, maybe I'll ask at this point, I'll ask Joe to come in here and just talk about those various things and whether, you know, how best we can be an advocate and lobby, and, you know, how do we help you change, I guess, UKRI and other organisations in these ways.
Yeah, so it's been really interesting to hear the work that you've been doing to get this feedback here today. So I guess one of the ways is to work directly with NERC as your kind of research council that most closely aligns to that, and we can help facilitate that. I work with NERC. I've been to a couple of their sessions on EDI leadership, and I'll be working with them on in the new year on some engagement events as well. But really happy to have follow-up conversations about how we can work together as part of the UKRI family to make some of this stuff happen. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. And one of the things we had, I guess one of the questions we kind of had from the surveys. Oh, actually, we've got a few other slides, haven't we? Before we go to that, actually, let's have a look at the last slide, I think, where we ranked the categories. Yeah, so actually the community think that lobbying institutions like NERC and other societies is one of the most important things we should do, the highest priority. Making adjustments to our annual meetings is up there too as well. So that's something that's quite interesting for us to do, because obviously we're quite a small committee, but we'll try and work on those things perhaps in that order. So that's really helpful. Sam?
If I could just interrupt,
yeah, please.
Mike, I think, you know, maybe many people in the VMSG community are not aware of some of the lobbying that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
VMSG was particularly kind of at the lead with colleagues from other special interest groups about lobbying NERC, about how we thought that we could encourage diversity and how we reach out to underrepresented groups. So we are doing this, but for sure we absolutely need to do more. And the way to do that is not to do it, you know, as Mike said, we're a relatively kind of small group, is to work with other organisations to do this.
Great. Brilliant. And I think there was a few other things that, you know, we have to kind of consider these in more detail, but these are things that we'll take to the committee as well. And there's some interesting thoughts about trying to emphasize how PIs can build kind of these anti-racist inclusive labs. What's the best practice for that? I think that's quite interesting for everyone, really. How to kind of, yeah, pre-allocate and mentor-mentee at conferences, something we certainly will take into consideration, and something that was in this actions. Making a database of scientists of regions of interest that we could call up as potential collaborators. And I think that's kind of talks to a bit about what Sally was talking about the networks that we have internationally and that we're building currently. Engaging with underrepresented communities to create visibility to earth scientists, and having an award explicitly for collaboration. So that's slightly different from just a stronger weighting, but having awards specifically to engagement or collaboration. Great. Sally or Sam, did you have any other thoughts about those before we move on?
I was just going to say it's a really interesting kind of range in comments that people have put in, and there's also been a couple of comments that people added to the Mentimeter or questions. So one of those was also related to one of the ones on the page, is looking at how reflecting on the fact that VMSG, even though it's quite a small community, to people that don't know it, can still be, the meetings, for example, can still be quite intense or daunting. And so the suggestion for buddy systems, or to enable kind of smaller networks to kind of make conversations and things like that easier. And these are things that we've definitely talked about and kind of thinking about how to pull into future meetings. And then another thing that was added was, can we create a common standard for international fieldwork collaborations, and looking at how we have an opportunity to say, you know, how to do volcanology and volcanic fieldwork ethically. And I think that we've, you know, we've got a really good group to do that. And again, that's just conversations going forward. But yeah, we've kind of started on the background work and can now work forward on some of these questions.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks for that. Another suggestion, I think, from the first Mentimeter was surrounding whether masters or other kind of disadvantaged groups might be kind of subsidized for the annual meeting. So that's another great suggestion that we can take forward to the committee and see how that goes. Here's some of the questions. Are there any plans for in future meetings, future in-person meetings that also run virtual field trips as well as physical ones?
Mm-hmm. So I think a really exciting initiative for our conference in early January, so if people out there aren't aware of this, is that we're having 2 mornings of virtual field trips. One's a workshop with sort of hands-on experience, and we're going to sort of parts of the world where many people may not have had the opportunity to visit. One of them I have, Namibia, truly fabulous part of the world. And I think these are going to be really exciting. They're going to bring sort of field work to, you know, to people's front rooms and at a time when maybe we're all feeling a bit frustrated because we're stuck at home. And I think this is a fabulous initiative, really, really great. So that will all be happening in early January at our annual conference.
I'd like to personally thank that person for the comment. You're right. You are right. We do mean where appropriate. Yeah, I'll move on from there.
Is there anything that can be done to make decision-making processes transparent? This is an interesting question that came up, and I guess it's also relevant for if or when we do implement some of these actions that have been voted on really highly today. How do we kind of monitor these actions? And also, yeah, how do we make them as transparent as possible? Because Sally won't always be the president, we won't always be on the committee. Yes, Jenny.
So I would just like to use a little bit of privilege that I've got my camera switched on. Please feel free to switch your cameras on and ask questions now in the last few minutes if there's anything that's occurred in listening to this. But I guess the question I want to ask for Jo is something that really came up a lot in our panels. There's a lot of deep frustration about creating genuine collaborators via UKRI funding research with a relatively limited way in which you can share resource. So kind of enabling them to use instrumentation back in the UK, or kind of a sort of proper full collaboration is actually hindered by that. And I just wondered if there's discussions about that to any extent, because obviously this might be something that applies to BBSRC too.
So I'm not aware of any live discussions, but that might be because I'm just not involved in those discussions. But I'd be happy to take the question away and put it back into our funding policy teams and get an answer for you.
I think that's something that we'd very much appreciate, and certainly appreciate it in terms of thinking about pathways by which we can do that lobbying, because it's clear that the community would like us to lobby on their behalf, and it was very clear from those panels that this was something that was an enduring frustration in terms of genuinely creating partnerships. So yeah, thanks, Jo.
Another thing actually, Jo, was that from one of the panels what came across is that there was a kind of an overemphasis on egocentric funded research, and obviously with UKRI being a funding body, you know, lots of people now are being asked to serve on committees and run lots of different diversity events, unconscious bias, etc. And I guess, you know, do you think that kind of behavior would get rewarded in that funding? And if not, then how do we kind of progress the equality side of things?
Yeah, so there's a team in UKRI that works alongside my team on research culture, and so we're in a section of the organisation that's focused on research culture and environment, and we work really closely together. One of the big areas of focus for that team is about reward and recognition. So how do we understand the bigger contributions that people make to the research endeavour? Who makes those contributions? How are they valued and rewarded? And so that might be an area that could be picked up perhaps in a future discussion with you, and be happy to connect you up with the research culture team.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I mean, that's something we've started to do in our awards, something we've weighted, and we're making that a stronger weighting as well. So that's really interesting. Relating to this, we had an interesting question about how we decide what inclusive behaviour is for awards and things like that. I guess anyone can talk about that, but maybe Jo to start off with.
Really interesting question, isn't it? And certainly Ottoline is talking a lot about criteria and how all of our assessment criteria can drive us down particular paths that inhibit inclusion. So I don't have an answer for you today, but I think this is a topic of conversation that is going to continue, and really welcome any thoughts that anyone else has.
I think it is something that's quite difficult to measure, and I think because a lot of these conversations are quite still quite young as well. We're still learning from other people about how different people collaborate, and that collaboration, I think we also need to remember, is different depending on the cultures that we're collaborating with. So it's not kind of a broad brush for everything. So I think until we start to think about some of those things, it's quite difficult to have a broad brush set of things that we can kind of tick off, but the conversations are happening about what it does look like, and what are the key points that we should be addressing or prioritizing. Great,
thank you. We're almost out of time, but if anyone has a quick question, let us know.
Can I just say one thing, Mike?
Yeah, please.
In response to the question about help or fees for VMSG meetings for master's students and undergraduate students, obviously this year the VMSG meeting, annual meeting, is virtual, and the fees are much reduced. So please, if there's any undergraduate students or master's students that are able to attend, willing to attend, I think it's a good opportunity to engage, and then obviously in future years we'll see how we can propagate that forward.
Thank you. Well, it's been really fantastic to have everyone here. Sally's going to sum up, but I think you've filled in the survey and really sent a clear message to all of us at VMSG going forward. So thank you so much for that. I'll be quiet now, and Sally, you can maybe finish up.
Thanks very much, Mike. So I think this has been a really exciting set of discussion panels that we've had. We've all had our eyes opened as to what maybe we haven't sort of paid enough attention to in the past, but also what we can do about this in the future. And maybe this wasn't the best possible date to choose for having our final panel session. Everybody's busy kind of getting ready for Christmas and things. But this will be available on YouTube, and so my comment goes out to those of you who are watching on YouTube. We value your opinions and we welcome any suggestions that you have. So do get in contact with us. We take addressing inequalities very seriously, and we're very keen to build on the kind of quite small steps that we've made already. So I thank people who've joined us today, and also for those of you who are listening perhaps later. And last but not least, I should thank Jenny and also Mike for making this such an engaging set of panel discussions. I think that they've really pulled out all the stops to involve people and to sort of stimulate discussion and get feedback. So I'm truly grateful to them.